All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a session about practicing, and I entitled it, We Tell Our Students to Go Home and Practice, but Do They Know How? And this is a very important topic. Obviously, our students spend a majority of their time away from the classroom, and we want them to be able to be successful. So we need to teach them how to teach themselves and how to practice and how to make efficient use of their time. My situation, I'm in a very high-level high school. Students take quite a few AP classes and IB classes, and so it's important that they maximize their time. And a lot of my students in the past have told me, well, I just don't have time to practice. I don't have time to dedicate to orchestra. But what I'm trying to show them is that they can spend a small amount of time, make the most use of it, and have good results and be able to feel like they're making progress towards their goals. So it is a very important thing. And like I said, students are spending a whole bunch of time away from us, and the time that they have away from us compared to the time that they have with us is significant. So we want to make sure that they're maximizing their time. So this session will be very practical. We're going to talk a little bit about some strategies and some ways that you can get students thinking about practicing so that they can, again, make some progress, feel like they're doing some good things, and also contributing to your orchestra program, so you're not having to reteach so many things over and over and over. The problem is, like I said, they're spending lots of time at home, hopefully not like you see on the screen here, but they're spending lots of time at home just having that unsupervised time. Depending on your situation, obviously, it's even more critical and crucial that your students understand how to practice when they're younger, in the beginning stages, because that's when all the problems develop. Hopefully you will never have a student that looks like this, but at the same time we want to make sure that not only our beginning students are being addressed, but our intermediate and our advanced students, because I've seen a lot of advanced students practice before, and one of the things I've done is I've collected some practice videos from them. I want to see them practicing, and I can't tell you the number of times students are just wasting time. So we're going to talk about some of these issues as we go through our session today. The quote, "Your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude." Remember, we have to get students in the right mindset to do good things and to progress. And it doesn't always necessarily mean they have to be gifted or the best player. They just have to use the right strategies and they will succeed. I have a teacher survey. This should have been sent out before this session, but the teacher survey, I want you to answer these questions. Most of my students practice regularly, true or false, or maybe it's something special for you. My students have everything they need in order to practice at home. I found students of mine do not have a music stand, and when I watch their videos, I see them taping their music to the wall in order to practice, and that's just not efficient. My students set practice goals and know what to practice. We're going to talk about some strategies to get them to do just that. And my students know how to utilize a variety of practice strategies. We need to provide them with some tools. What may work for one student may not work for the other. So we have to provide them with some tools that they can pull out and use to accomplish their goals. And I grade my students on the amount of practice they complete. And so those are some things we're going to ask you in this survey. Like I said, it should have been sent out ahead of time. But I did my own survey of students' practice habits, and I wanted to see the beginning of last school year. I wanted to see what they thought and what they how they kind of conceived practice in their head. So this was at the beginning of the semester when the kids were really motivated to want to do good things. I had surveyed about 150 high school students. That's my population, grades 9 through 12. My program consists of 5 levels of orchestra, from We have a grade 2-3 orchestra through 2 grade 6 orchestras. The grade 2-3, I have students who are struggling, students who had played through middle school but really never gained those independent musician skills. And then I have a grade 4 orchestra, my intermediate, grade 5, and then I have a grade 6 full orchestra that also obviously plays string repertoire, which is a larger class. And then I have my elite class of about 17 to 20 students in my chamber orchestra. They play all of the full orchestra music from the level before, but they also play their own repertoire, so they kind of do double duty. And I did it anonymously because I wanted them to provide the most honest answers. So I'll show you what I came up with. My students, and once again, let me preface by saying I come from a high school that is very diverse. We have lots of diversity among students in the area of socioeconomics and also in the area of cultural diversity. So that it's something that I really enjoy and love. But a majority of the students are it's an affluent community and a well-supported community as far as music goes, and high academics. So my students, my practice is deeply meaningful to me, and I seldom feel bored. Most students said true, which was nice to hear. I keep to a regular practice schedule, and that's where a majority of a large number of my students said false. Some of them said true. Out of the 150 students that I have 15 students who made All-State. Usually have between 30 and 40 trying out every year. So a very dedicated group of students. Quite a few studying privately, but I wouldn't say it's over 20 to 30% of students studying privately. Next, I feel like I can learn my music in class without practicing at home. That's a large majority of them said false, which I was glad to hear. What we don't want are students who rely on class time to practice. My practice space at home is fully equipped with the things I need. Most of them said yes. Again, there's a few who don't have the music stand or don't have the phone to download a metronome app. I included what they should have in that list with this question. And then I set detailed goals. A lot of students said true, but I'm not sure if that is the truth or not. But detailed goals, I'm not sure if they knew exactly what that meant. So we spent last year really working on that, giving them ideas and goals to set for themselves. I typically feel a sense of accomplishment after practicing. I love that response. I'm glad they felt like they had accomplished something. And I'm able to maintain mental focus as I practice. True. Some of them said false. I know for myself, one of the challenges is keeping that mental focus. So we're going to talk about some ways for students to do that. I commonly record my portions of my practice and then I appraise my recordings. Most of them said false. And some of the assignments I gave last year were ones where they had to practice and record themselves practicing. We had a weekly practice vlog, like a video log, and I wanted the students to record that vlog style. So that means they're talking to the camera and interacting with the camera as if they were, a YouTube vlogger. And a lot of my students embraced that, and I learned a lot about them, and I think they learned a lot about themselves as well. I use a metronome in practice. That was good. Almost 100 of them said that, while the rest of them did not. And let's see. I consistently warm up before practicing. That was another thing I was grateful for. I'm not sure what the warm-ups consist of with these students, but at least they think that they're warming up and doing some things like that. And I learn my music efficiently, securely and efficiently. Again, I was proud of that. We have to remember that how we assign music to our groups is really important. That's a whole nother topic, whole nother session of programming and assigning our students the tasks that they're supposed to accomplish. When learning a new piece, I expressly vocalize rhythm. It was mixed, half and half. I would love my students to be able to vocalize their rhythms, sing and speak rhythms and pitches. I've used specific strategies to solve musical and technical problems. That's great. And then I routinely practice sight reading, and that was a big negative. And that's again another topic. But students to practice sight reading would be great, and we need to provide them some of those resources, whether it's printed resources or some things we make up on our own, or Sight Reading Factory, for the students to be able to practice sight reading. Because the number one thing I found in my auditions is kids will go in and nail the auditions, play their scales, play the excerpts, and they have trouble with the sight reading. I feel like I understand how to practice so that I can efficiently, or so I can perform confidently. That was great. I want them to be able to feel successful, whether they're on their own or whether they're in class. And then, so we'll go. Those were the survey results, and it was just neat to see that. With the last year being crazy and the COVID and all that, I was not able to do a post survey, but I'm going to try it again this year and do a survey at the beginning of the year and again at the end of the year. And I'm also going to try to divide my results by how my students, the students I had last year, and how they've improved, and then my incoming new students as well. All right, so obviously we have to go through some things. Essential items that every student needs: adequate space. I do have some students that are apartment dwellers, and they share bedrooms with siblings. That makes it challenging for them to practice. So I get some practice videos that are from the bathroom. Totally fine, right? But privacy, the ability to have their own space, adequate lighting. We want them to feel like they're in an environment where they can it's just a nice place to spend time. On an uninterrupted, quiet environment. I've also had some students tell me that they just don't have that time away from their family to be able to practice. A chair, especially if they're a cellist, they're in an appropriate chair. I have students who practice on their bed with their end pin out too far. It just makes it real challenging. So we want to make sure our parents know that these are the things our students need in order to practice at home and be successful. Music stand, we mentioned that already, having that so that they can get the music at the right height and not having to play out of their case or something crazy like that. And also a pencil, and then a tuner and metronome. And while our students may have a cell phone, they may not realize these great resources that are out there, so we're going to get them to take advantage of that. And then I also highly encourage students to have a stand or a wall-mounted instrument hanger. And I tell them that if your instrument is readily available for you in your room or wherever you're going to practice, and it's looking at you, it's sitting there on the wall or on a stand, you have a better chance that you're going to pick it up and play it. And I tell them, leave it out. Don't pack up your instrument. The number one thing that keeps kids from practicing their instrument is that it's packed up and it's away, out of sight, out of mind. We want it to have it in plain view for them to always just walk by it and say, oh, you know what? I can play for 5 minutes. And then I also recommend a mirror. And it's, from your college years, hopefully your practice rooms had mirrors. Super helpful, especially with all the things that we're doing are so physical. It's important for them to have that mirror. So I tell students, if you don't have a mirror in your room to practice with, go in the bathroom and practice in there. And you need to see what you look like from afar, and you'll see a lot of the technical things happening on your instrument that you might not notice from the vantage point where you're playing. All right. Why do we need to think about how to practice? Well, students are usually only concerned about the outcome. That is, what do they sound like? They don't think about the process and how to get there. They want to do vibrato, but they don't think about what do I have to do to get to play vibrato? Or they want to play a certain piece, but they don't break down that piece in practicing terms. So we want to make sure they understand the process, not the product necessarily. And then naturally, students don't know how to practice. We have to show them ways. And I'm sure we were all this way. I always think about listening to pianists practicing, and they're trying to practice a run, and they play a couple notes and stop, and then they think, and they go back and play the notes again, and they play it wrong. They're reinforcing those bad habits. We don't want our students to go home and practice incorrectly and develop those bad habits. So we need to teach them these things. Here are some of the bad habits that students do. They start a new piece near performance tempo. We need to teach them that we always start slow. Slow practice is the best practice. I think it was Perlman that said he's one of the fastest players because he's one of the slowest practicers, or maybe that was Stern. But anyways, slow practice, great. It's most important. Or they'll plow through or slop through a piece with only getting half of the notes correct, rather than training themselves. And we call it practice, but I've also do a lot of analogies to athletics and talk to my students about that we're training. We're not just practicing, we're training for this game or this event, and we have to do it carefully. We wouldn't want to train for a marathon by going out the first day and running a marathon. We have to start slow, work up towards the goal. So slopping through, not acceptable. And then going back to the hard spots and only slowing down a little bit. So we need to, again, show them how to practice methodically and slowly. Repeating mistakes in the hard spots and developing bad habits, because the brain does learn mistakes, and if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, it's going to reinforce that mistake, and it's a bad habit. All right, Gerald Klickstein, his book, The Musician's Way, A Guide to Practice, Performance, and Wellness. I've used a lot of his materials for this presentation. Really great book. I can't recommend it enough. It's available on Amazon and also in electronic format on Kindle. Check it out. His practice zones are: 1, new material, so anything that's brand new. And then second is developing material. You'll spend time developing, again, different practice strategies and different methods of going through each of these zones. And then the performance material, things that you're almost ready to perform. So they should be kind of polishing at that point. And then technique practice, focusing in, zeroing in on just the essential techniques of what we do. And then last is musicianship, taking material that you've worked on and making it musical, whether we're working on phrasing, dynamics, etc., etc., etc. So those are some things to think about as we go through. So as you plan your practice, you're taking your new material, you divide it into sections. So when I was assigning my students things in their practice vlog, I said you're going to find things to practice from measure 1 to measure X, and this is the section. So it made it a little less daunting for them to look at a whole piece and say, wow, I have to practice this. If you're working in multiple things, take small sections from each one. But establish a plan, and finally, like we've already talked about, slow down. So for the developing material, this is where you're going to, and this is more of an advanced thing. I understand that your 6th graders aren't going to refine their interpretation of Ode to Joy, but for your advanced students, this is where they're going to start looking at things and refining how they're approaching it, starting to increase that tempo using the metronome, and also starting to memorize. It's important that we encourage memorization of our students, because that really internalizes all of those technical concepts and musical concepts. Our performance material, students need to practice performing, and I tell them, practice for your family, practice for the camera, practice for friends, practice for your dog, but practice performing. And then maintaining that learned material, keeping it going, keeping it fresh, keeping it under your belt, if you will. And then renewing that material and maybe making new innovations, new changes within that material to make it something different or something better. Obviously, your technique practice, and this is something that I encourage a lot, scales, arpeggios, and then just maybe with your advanced students, having them focus in on improving their vibrato, whether it's varying that speed or the width, those kind of things. Last, musicianship. I feel it's really important for our students to think about this even from a young age, but I always create a YouTube playlist for each of my classes, and the great thing is you can create a link to a YouTube playlist and keep adding videos or removing videos based upon your repertoire. But the great thing is that link always will remain the same. But students do need a model. They need something that they can follow, something that they can look at and want to be like, want to hear that tone, want to see the technique that they're using. So create YouTube playlists for each of your classes. Put in recordings from different orchestras, professional recordings, and you can put good recordings and not so good recordings, which you can easily find on YouTube. Put both of those in there and allow them to, have something to watch. I tell students, when you're doing your math homework, put on your YouTube playlist and let it loop. Hopefully it'll sink in and they'll start to listen and model those things. Sight reading practice, and then theory practice, ear training, improvisation. All these things, if we can get students to start working on. I use musictheory.net and I create custom exercises. I have a few on my website for my younger students. Just those are note names and things like that. But you can do key signature challenges and create customized drills for them to practice. One of the assignments you could give is to have them go on musictheory.net with a link that you provide, do the drills and make them do 50 note names or 25 key signatures, and then take a screenshot of their progress and turn that in for their digital assignment. Lots of great ear training things on Tone Savvy. And then improvisation, I like to get my students thinking about that a little bit. I've used Christian House's playlist he's got all kinds of great things on his YouTube playlist that just let students start thinking about different styles. And it's really fantastic. All right, so when we're getting our students to practice, we need to also think about, as I mentioned earlier, the ability for them to be successful. We have to keep them in with what the professionals call the zone of proximal development, or ZPD for short. So maybe we have to decide, if our music is too difficult, students are just going to get frustrated and they're not going to be motivated to practice. So we have to keep it within the area of the zone of proximal development where they're going to be comfortable working on something. It's what I can learn on my own. And then using tools and practicing and a little bit of guidance, being able to take them outside of what they already know without going to the area that's beyond their reach, right? So we have to provide students with experience that will be positive and with goals that are attainable, but we have to keep them within their limits so they don't get frustrated and not want to do it anymore. All of us have been guilty to over-programming, and we want to make sure that we are not over-programming and we're giving our students things that they can be successful with. Time is the enemy and progress is the goal. Again, I mentioned this earlier. My students particularly, they're always telling me that they're so crunched for time. And we have a lot of students who are doing high academics, or they're in several athletic events and team sports, whatnot. And so we have to make sure that they're allotting some time for orchestra and practicing. But they need to we have to teach them how to use their time. And I tell them, if you in the practice room, if you sound good and you're playing stuff that you sound good on, you're just wasting your time. You should always be practicing those things that you're struggling with, and you should never really sound polished in your practice unless you're practicing, you're performing, which we talked about earlier. But that practice time, take 10 minutes and make sure that you are working on something that's going to basically something that you're going to be able to feel like you made progress on. And it doesn't have to be the whole piece. It could be 4 measures. It could be 1 measure. But make a goal, set a goal, and make use of your practice time. And the question is, are you spending time with your instrument, or are you practicing your instrument? So we want to make sure students are making best use of their time. All right. playing versus practice, the attitude is most important. But when they start just playing through stuff, it's good, but that's not practicing. We want to we don't want students to go over a problem area and instantly expect it to be solved. We have to allow students to have a minute or two to practice a small spot. So in rehearsal, I'll do this all the time. We're working on something, students are struggling. I'll say, okay, everybody take 30 seconds or a minute, and I want you to practice this on your own, slowly and carefully, and see if you can work it up. And then we're going to come back and put it together, because simply asking students to regurgitate, oh, that was pretty good, let's do it again, or let's do it again, without giving them the time, sometimes does more harm than good. So turn a portion of your rehearsal into a mini practice session. You can have everybody do that, or have students break off into groups real quick for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, come back and see if that helps. But we have to make them aware that when we practice, we're not just playing. I'm not sure if any of you use practice logs. This is what a typical practice log looked like when I was in high school and middle school, and it basically had your name, and it had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and what did we put in those boxes? We put nothing but lies, right? We put minutes in there, and forcing minutes, a number of minutes on our students, does not have positive effects. It has negative effects. I'm not sure if your parents signed your practice log, but mine did, and they know that I didn't practice those number of minutes. So we want to take away the focus on minutes and put it into setting goals. And I'll show you kind of some of the things that I've been able to do. But that old school practice is just not a positive thing. So we want to build those good habits. It takes time. This year, I feel like this past year, I feel like my students made some progress. I don't feel like all of them broke their bad habits. So we're going to keep working on it, and we're going to keep going with it. But the power of habit is to cue. So you have to tell our students, what they need to do. 2, get into a routine of some sort. That, again, means scheduling your practice. And 3, providing some kind of reward. And students can do this on their own by their cue would be finding what they need to work on. 2 is actually doing it. And 3 is rewarding themselves, whether that's free time or, whatever it might be. But getting into good habits. And then the reward motivates students to continue. And a lot of times students are motivated in my classroom by their grades. So once they turn it in and it's on time, they get rewarded with their grade. But one study states that building a good habit, everyday behaviors took an average of 66 days. So schedule your practice. Whether some of my students decided they were morning people and they started practicing before school, or come in before the school first period bell rang. And then I've also received practice log students practicing at like 11 o'clock at night or midnight. So you have to find the time, squeeze it in there. All right, now we're going to talk about some practice strategies. These come from a book called Practice with Purpose. And it's just a great little book. I recommend it for everybody. You can assign it to your students, or you can just grab it and pull some of the strategies out and share those with your students. But obviously the slower is faster strategy. We all know this. We all play too fast. I'm sure a lot of us, ourselves included. But we have to start with a tempo that will allow for near perfection on the very first try. On the first playthrough, book talks about how the first playthrough can be compared to the first sled run on a freshly fallen snow. When you first make that path, on subsequent runs, you will follow that original path. So it's important to start slow, make a good path the first time so that the rest of them are also good. But going slower is faster. It's a faster way to learn. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to be not reinforcing those bad habits. Identify those problem areas prior to practicing. Put your instrument down. Mark things in your music. Write it in. Bracket. I have students always make brackets in the areas that I want them to practice. And then loop those problem areas. Do it over and over and over till it becomes habit, right? the brain and the muscles need that consistency. We've heard of the thing called muscle memory. Well, I remind my students that your muscles have no brain. You have one brain that controls your muscles, and we have to reinforce those synapses all the time. But we repeat for success. One of the things I found works great for me and for my students is backwards practice. So especially on descending lines, I find students have a harder time descending passages, especially with intonation, and sometimes with shift. They shift up real well, but sometimes they have trouble shifting down. So if you take a passage, a scale-like passage, it's kind of like this, and play it backwards, it could be amazing. But it's sometimes easier for students to hear ascending intervals rather than descending. So this is a way to do it. And then so I have them practice backwards and then forwards. And then I tell them, now you know this inside and out, backwards and forwards and upside down and all that. So backwards practice, take a passage and work it backwards. You'll find you'll hear some things you may not have heard playing it going forward, especially if it's a melody that they think they have in their head, or a variation on a melody. This really helps. Backward practice. Find the repetitive sections. Well, music has lots of repetition, right? So we want the student to identify those sections and then not worry about practicing them again. Very easy to also use this time finding repetitive sections to identify form. You could see very simply sonata allegro form. You have the exposition, the development's going to be different, and then the recap. Oh, it's just like the beginning, right? So it's our way of letting our students identify their forms. Rondo form, very easy to identify using this. So finding those repetitive sections to save time. When students play out of tune, or they're so focused on looking at their music, they're missing some things. I tell them to memorize it or memorize a couple notes, close your eyes, and play it without your music. And it's amazing what students start to hear when their eyes are closed. Just like we know the blind have that increased sense of hearing, same kind of thing. And play softer. Students will play super loud. They'll play a note out of tune, and they're playing it so loud they're not listening anymore. So when you play a little softer, just like when I bring my voice down, it makes you pay attention just a little bit more, right? So playing softer, closing your eyes, another great strategy. Obviously, next one, audio recording. Self-assessment, as painful as it can be, not only for our students but for teachers, is really an amazing thing. You start to recognize some patterns, both good and bad, and it allows students to maybe more individualize how they sound, because when they're playing with the orchestra, they always think they're going to sound great, but when they record themselves individually, they can address their tone, their intonation, all these things, be a lot more specific with themselves. So it's a really positive thing, audio recording. The microphones don't lie, right, as we know. Video recording. Now, I recommend video and audio separately because video will address a lot of the technical issues students might be having, their position, their stage presence, whatever you want to look at, bow hold, bow angles, but video is nice because it can be slowed down and analyzed. And audio is great because it takes away that visual part and makes students really key in. The Coach's Eye app is fantastic. It allows you, it was made obviously for coaches to look at, golf swings, baseball swings, running strides, all kinds of different things like that, but it allows you to slow down the video. You can scrub between it. You can actually draw on the video with some of the tools. It's available for iOS and Android, I believe. Check out Coach's Eye. It's a fantastic, wonderful app. I use it to especially for bow stroke, looking at the movement of the hand, the wrist, the elbow, and then checking those angles with the instrument. Super handy. Write it down. Follow a symphony musician in a rehearsal and count how many times they pick up their pencil and put it down. I think students would be amazed. And these are professionals. right? So if professionals do it, you definitely need to do it. But it's their job to perfect their music, and they just don't have time to think they're going to remember it. And with all that's going on with your students, they're not going to remember something that you tell them as well. So make sure your students have the pencil. Make sure they're marking in tempo markings for the practice. I always give out, and in my score, I'll write the date and the tempo, and I'll keep a little log in small pencil markings on my score of where we are. And I give my students those tempos too. This week we should be at quarter note equals 90, whatever it might be. And let them know our goal tempo. This is what we're working to. We're working to quarter note equals 120. So here's where we are, and here's where we need to go. Have them circle those key signatures and any kind of changes in key signature. Make sure their fingerings are written in. I tell the students you need to have a plan for your fingerings. No plan, you're gonna crash and burn when it comes down to the performance. So, and we don't allow just winging it as far as fingerings go. We have to have a plan. Phrasing, have students write in the climax and decline each phrase, and make sure students mark it right away. Don't allow them to not do it. It's okay if you keep going and a section has to stop to write in a fingering or mark something in the music. It's totally okay, but do it now. Do it right now. And then you can also save a lot of time in rehearsal by marking your music before. And there's two schools of thought on marking up music before putting in fingerings for students. I choose the latter, where I don't write in a lot of fingerings for my students because I want them to go through that process and learn what they need to do, how they need to do it. So it's up to you how you want to do that. With middle school students, I wrote in a lot more for them before we started than I do with my high school students. So decide what, your philosophy and what works for you. A lot of us have used rhythmic variations, but when we have especially a variation of fast passages that are challenging, maybe the notes are difficult, or maybe whatever it might be, or the range is difficult, this is where you can create bursts of speed and learn it in a different way. So if you look at the triplet pattern I have here on the screen, the rhythmic variation 1 would be to take that and play it with the 8th note, 2 16th notes, 8th note, 2 16th notes, and then go the opposite, 2 16th notes, 8th notes. And you can use dotted rhythms, whatever it takes, but show your students that rhythmic variation can be a very helpful tool for them. Using your voice. I tell my students, you don't have to have a good voice, but you do want to use that so that you can internalize those rhythms and those pitches. It's also so much easier to model phrasing with your voice and have students model that back and then say, okay, now let's apply that to our instrument. So the vocal inflection is really important. Also, articulations are very easy to articulate with your voice, whether it's staccato, or legato. Those are some things that they're going to be able to hear and not necessarily have to do on their instrument, but they can apply them. The earlier you start your kids singing, the easier it is. If you've never had your kids sing before or articulate with their voice, trying to get them to do it when they're seniors is going to be a challenge, right? When I was in college, I had a wonderful trombone professor named Philip Fink, and he's kind of a legend in the trombone world, but he would not let us play a single line of music from our book with the trombone until we sang it first. We had to sing it first, and then we were allowed to play it. One of the other things I've done with vocal inflection is when we talk about an accent, I talk about using the word pow, 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 and how we can change that by adding more air and our lips and all that kind of stuff. It's really amazing what your voice can do to get students to understand, like I said, phrasing, articulation, etc. Shadow bow and air bow. You can isolate the skills away from the instrument, eliminating that left hand, and just work on those bowing skills and singing through while bowing. Here is a great sequence that is in a sample video from Essential Elements Interactive.
It is important to continue practicing and reinforcing the playing techniques from the previous videos. Additionally, an organized practice routine will help you continue a high level of achievement. This video will help you establish a practice routine to be a better player and practice independently. We will use line 57, Tribal Lament, as our practice piece. The first step in the practice routine is to tap your toe and say or sing the letter names. This step will help you develop good pulse, rhythm, and note reading skills. Try this with Catherine. Sing or speak along with Catherine as she taps the tip of her right foot and sings the note names. Be sure to tap your toe on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. You will hear 4 clicks before the music starts. The next step in the practice routine is to play pizzicato and say or sing the note names or finger numbers. This step will help you focus on keeping a good left hand shape and playing in tune while practicing music reading. Play along with Catherine as she plays pizzicato and sings the note names. The next step in the practice routine is to shadow bow and say or sing the note names or bow direction. This step will help you focus on using the correct bow direction and making a beautiful sound as you read the music. Perform the music while moving the bow in the air and singing the note names. Let's try this with Catherine. Get set in playing position with the bow in the air and perform this with Catherine. Now that you have mastered the previous steps, you are ready to perform the piece. Get set in playing position. Make sure your left hand is set correctly. Now place your bow in the correct place on the D string. Play this with Catherine. Now you can use these practice techniques to prepare any music that you need to perform. Following this practice routine will allow you to perform music more accurately, making it more fun to play. As you learn new pieces, remember the steps in an effective practice routine.
So that practice routine from essential elements is really great to show students that regardless of the level, that's an example of what they can do to reinforce the skills kind of separately, but also internalize the pulse and the pitch at the same time. So another thing I have students do is find a model. I want them to be following the greats on Instagram and YouTube, and it's really amazing what artists put out there for everybody to listen to. But find on social media, YouTube, etc. Become obsessed with this person. Whether it's Yo-Yo Ma, Josh Bell, or anybody that's professional, so that they can have that model and have someone to want to be like. And then you can do lots of different assignments with this too, where you can compare two or more models, maybe playing the same piece and determining what they like better in terms of their sound, vibrato, whatnot. It's really, really fun for students to be able to find these models and just follow them. But we want them to be inspired by something, by someone. And then modeling for your students. It's one of the number one teaching strategies, providing a live model for them, whether it's live in class or if you're doing virtual teaching or even just flipped classroom, recording video excerpts of yourself and posting it for your students to use during home practice. Students are in orchestras because they like to play with other people. And when they're at home, obviously they don't have that opportunity. So providing some videos for them to feel like they're playing with other people or with someone else makes it a lot more fun for them, a lot more motivating. Post those to your Google Classroom or YouTube channel or your website or whatever, embed them. But it's also really handy to have some of these things when students are absent. You have some things for them to do some makeup work. I've had students who have missed a few days of school, and I say, okay, to make up the time, you need to go and practice along with this and report back to me. So here's an example of a model video.
Figure patterns.
Just something as simple as that, where you're just going through finger patterns or playing scales or just different warm-ups. Really simple to do, really easy to post. All right, and then another strategy, going back to basics, what we call back to basics. That's where we take everything out of the music except for the notes and rests, and we add them in slowly. So we're taking everything out and we just add in the slurs, or we just add in articulations, or different things like that. But just taking some things away will be really helpful. I call it pizziarco, but anything that is marked as arco and students are having trouble, have them put the bow down and do it pizzicato. And the pizzicato section's the opposite way. I found pizzicato sections that rush generally don't rush when you put the bow with them. So, being able to go back and forth between pizzicato and arco, but it will help isolate some string crossings and different bowings, whatever's problematic with the right hand, and can also help timing and attacks and rhythm. So here's an example of kind of a tricky cello lick, right? And if we take this out and we have students pizzicato it, it's going to help them learn those notes, and then we can add in the slurs as needed. And then play all the notes separately, and then add in the slurs at the end. So lots of different ways, but have students pizzicato arco sections and arco pizzicato sections, and you'll have some good results, I think. I've also tried to introduce students to target notes, because we need to have students thinking vertically when they're playing an orchestra, right? So that everything lines up. When you have an excerpt such as this from Night on Bald Mountain, and all the violins are playing together, and it's chromatic and it's fast, and there's 16th notes, it can turn out to be pretty messy. But if you look at each of the pink arrows I have there, on each of those notes, I'm having students try to hit those target notes. So even if they miss a note or are too fast, they need to land on those particular notes. And I find it to be a strategy that's very helpful. So you'll see an example of me teaching these target notes right here. Freezing the C sharp. Ready, your turn. This is to line up these 8th notes. Ready, and go, and. Now do that measure. That's right. Right, we're coming back up. 2, ready, and go, and. And that open A is easy to find, right? This is so we don't get lost. One more time. 2, ready, C sharp and down. Now the next one, we're going to freeze on the F natural. Starting on open A, ready, and go, E, and up. One more time, ready, and. Now let's do the scale coming down. We're going to freeze each time. Lift, and. Sorry, ready, and. You get the idea. Ready, here we go, and. Lift, and. Lift, and. Lift, and. Good. And that's how you can kind of line up, aim for those beginning of the measures. Don't do the whole thing with no break, but think about lining up the C sharp, the open A, and the F natural. 2, 1, and go, and. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So the target notes, something that giving them a strategy again to work on. Another one I use a lot is called add a note. And this is a little lick that's measured 31-32 from Spring Breezes by Richard Meyer. And just getting the timing down of releasing the F sharp and starting those 2 16th notes individually and then slurring the other 16th notes. You get to see how I do that here. Breathe. Well, let's start up bow. And breathe. Go. Good, now we're going to add that note. 2, ready, and move, and go. Okay, and Cooper, make sure we're getting all the way to the frog. 2, ready, and spend it, go. 2. One more time. Breathe, make sure you're moving and breathing. Go. Good, now we're going to add a couple more notes. With the string crossing, ready, and. Now we can add some more notes now that we've done the string crossing, right? Whoops, I did it wrong. Right, 2. Let's add all the way to F sharp. And. Good, starting out bow, start up bow, start up bow. And. Good, now what can we do? The last 4 notes. The string crossing. Good. Now can we do the second half of that measure? Just a scale. Starting on the down bow C. Ready and go. And. One more time. Here we go. And. Okay, and then we're going to add the top note. And. Make sure you breathe when you start down bow on the C. And. Good. So then we have. Here we go. Ready? 2, 3, up, bow, and go. Yeah. Everybody a little bit better right now? Now you got to go home and reinforce. How did I teach that? We did one little part, and we add, and add those notes. I took the second half of the measure, and I took that out. So this is how you can practice. This is one of those strategies you can use. Good job. So that very helpful in that case, and lots of ways to apply the add a note strategy. My favorite practice tools and apps are Tempo, the metronome. The metronome has lots of features. It allows you to plug in subdivisions. You can make set lists of different pieces. One of my favorite metronome apps. A lot of you probably know about Tonal Energy Tuner, but does obviously just tuning, but an audio analysis. One of the other things a lot of people don't know, and this is a kind of a topic for a separate area, is that you can plug in a MIDI keyboard to your iPad using an adapter, and it will allow you to play the keyboard with pure intonation, which is really neat to show students the differences between a pure triad and an equally tempered triad. Anyways, so check out Tonal Energy Tuner. Lots of tools in that app. We already mentioned Coach's Eye. And then another one I use a lot is called AnyTune Pro Plus, and it allows me to take recordings of myself or anything I have and load it into there, and you can slow it down for practice, for analysis. And if you pay a little bit, I think it's like about $5, it allows you to also export your slowed down practice. So if you make practice tracks of you playing or you play along with a recording, you can take that recording and slow it down and then export it to an MP3 file for your students to play along with. Really cool app. A lot of great things in there. So going on, one of the things that I've started doing this year, along with the vlog, the video that was due each week, was I had students fill out some kind of journal. And these are a couple examples. These are examples from Practicing with Purpose, that book that I mentioned earlier, where you're breaking down your practicing into those areas of setting goals, your performance material, what are you practicing, the fundamentals and technique that you're focusing on, your ensemble material, if it's different from performance material, and for students who are serious, that might be, or I assign a solo to each of my students each semester and require them to also prepare some kind of individual piece, and then new and developing material, and then a reflection. How did it go this week? And so here's the example of what the journal looks like. You have your goals, and it's just little boxes. You can do this digitally too, using Google Docs or Google Sheets or something like that, and just having students write down what they're doing. It just makes so much sense, and it's important. It's important for students to be able to do this. Here's an example of what one might look like filled out. They got the date at the top, and then just some goals. And you can show a sample like this to your students so that they kind of know what to work on. But increasing tempo of scales, learning a new etude, performance material, right? The fundamental technique, warm-up routine, their scales, ensemble material, and then the new material, there it is, read through, right? And then the reflection, how do they do? Okay, or what are they going to work on next time? So just some examples here. Again, check out that book, Practicing with Purpose by David Kish. But again, for making practice meaningful, they need to schedule it, use a calendar. I encourage my students to try to schedule everything that they do at home, so they're really budgeting their time, and also to make sure that they're not only setting aside their time for doing work, but also setting aside time for play. Developing that practice plan, practicing and reflecting. So once again, let's talk about what you should be doing. Don't require students to practice for a number of minutes. We know that those are not going to be truthful anyways. But do use class time to discuss the practice techniques, so that, because students aren't going to just figure it out. You have to show them. But it will allow them to learn the material on their own. My violin teacher from my undergraduate, Howard Beebe, said his goal was to make me my own teacher, because someday he wasn't going to be there for me, and obviously that's true. So we want to make our students into capable, independent musicians so that they can be able to do this when they're not in our class. Our goal should be lifelong learning, right? So we want to teach them how to practice, but provide students with some sample practice plans, and then that will help them develop their own. Do demonstrate the practice strategies in rehearsal and maybe come up with names for them so that you can easily reference them in the future, like to add a note, etc., etc. But ask students to use specific practice strategies in their rehearsal when you assign them a piece or a section or whatever it might be. Have students complete their journal and use that as the basis for grades instead of practice minutes. I found great luck this year, great success in having my students fill out a kind of a defined form that I made in Google Docs, and I created a copy for each one, and then they were able to use that as their practice log for the week or their vlog, and assign students the task of creating their own practice plan. So here are some of the references I use: is Practicing with Purpose. Again, The Musician's Way by Gerald Klickstein. And there's also the website that goes along with it. There's a link there for you. Another book is called Perfect Practice by Dan Heath. But finding these books and just trying to get a few things, even if your students use a few of the strategies, it's going to make them better practicers. I'll let you go ahead and take a look at some of those articles as well, and the links are there for you. If you have any questions about this session or about what I've done in my classroom, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll leave my contact information for you. I need to thank my sponsors, Hal Leonard Corporation, my school district, Fulton County Schools, Eastman Strings, and D'Addario. They're all great partners in helping me do what I do. There's my contact info. If you need anything, please do not hesitate to contact me via email, Facebook Messenger, Twitter. All of these slides and more are available on orchestrateacher.net. Everything I've really ever done is available on this website. I hope it will be a good resource for you. It's been a pleasure being able to present for you today, and look forward to our Q&A that will be coming up soon. Take care.